everybody? Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm saying that. Somehow it's been 3 months since I've recorded an episode of Reclaim. I cannot believe where the time has gone. It feels like the older I am getting, the faster time is going. It is very disorienting. I'm also in a new location. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm trying new places in my house that may offer better lighting. I do worry that it may be a little too echoey in here, but I am just giving it a go. I don't have a dedicated space in my home for podcasting, and I've been too lazy to go rent out a podcast studio. There's so many ways that I would love for Reclaim to be better. I would love for the production value to be better. I have so many fantasies of what Reclaim can be, and then when it gets down to doing the thing, I'm just finding myself not doing it, and I've been grappling with that a lot. There's a lot to mourn when it comes to something not fulfilling or not being the fantasy that we want it to be, and at the same time, maybe this is a way that I get to model to all of you that done is better than perfect, and that if I had waited and continued to wait for Reclaim to be the production value that I think it deserves, that I would not record anything, and then nothing would be out in the world, and that's just not better. There's space, right, for the podcast to be better, and I'm aware of that, and maybe one day it will be better, but right now I would rather my voice, my message, my work, my passion to be out in the world than to stay hidden, waiting for the opportunity to present itself for this podcast to be even better. So this is maybe hopefully inspiration in some way, that if you have a thing that you want to do, just do the thing. It may not be perfect, and you may not get a lot of views, and it may not, change the world right away. And it's better. The world is better with you in it, and the world is better with your voice in it. More of you and your voice and your power and your presence in the world everything is just better. It's just better. And where we don't believe in that, where we really struggle with that, well, of course, that's where the work lies. And I'm here, and I'm recording a new episode of Reclaim. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you. I will say, despite my hiatus, I have heard from so many of you who have reached out concerned, wondering if I'm okay. There's been so many of you that have shared with me how the podcast has resonated with you, and I'm really always so honored by your contact. I love hearing from you. Thank you for reaching out. Yes, I am okay. While I didn't expect to go on a hiatus, there's been some things on the back end that's been going on that have just taken up more space and energy, that then took away my capacity to show up fully for the podcast. And while some of the things that have been going on isn't mine to tell, there are a couple things that I do want to share with you that are mine to tell. One, I've got a new office. I see patients in person on Fridays, and I do have availability if you are in LA, specifically West LA, or if you don't mind to drive. My office is in Westwood. I got a new office. It's just down the street from my old office. I love it very much, and I do have availability in my office for one. I have one slot available if you would like to meet in person. I do also have open slots for virtual work if you are interested in doing that. But getting a new office, it took up a lot of attention, and I just didn't expect it to find. I didn't expect the speed in which I was kind of pushed into finding a new office, but it all worked out, and I'm glad that it did, but that took up some time. The other thing that has been taking up time is that I enrolled last year in a 1-year psychoanalytic psychotherapy program at an analytic institute here in Los Angeles, and I've enjoyed that so much. I am so delighted by the people in the cohort with me. It has been one of the most breathtaking programs. The people always make things better, and I am just so glad that I did this program and I've met the people that I've met. But we met every Monday, and it took up time. There was a lot of readings, and it just took up a lot of time and space in my life. And while I am so glad that I did it, now that it is over, I do have my Mondays back, and I think that that's going to be my podcasting days. It's so funny, you know, a lot of therapists invest their money on the kind of hottest modality, right? EMDR is the hottest thing you can do right now. IFS is having its moment. And here I am investing so much time, energy, and effort into more old school work. Not because it is antiquated by no means, but because it's the foundation of everything else. And any kind of modern, kind of cool, catchy psychotherapy modality, really at the core of it, like what works about it is psychoanalytic concepts. And so I love psychoanalysis. I love psychodynamic theory. I love understanding how come it is so hard to change, and what can we do as the facilitators, therapists, space holders to facilitate change. This has always been a big interest in my life. You know, I loved psychology in high school, and I wanted to major in it in college and didn't, and wondered if I was going to regret it, and I didn't regret it because the majority of psychology that's taught in college is very behavioral based, which is not my interest. But I've always loved this idea of how come it's so hard to change, and what can we do as the facilitator to do that. And that's why I have my mentorship for depth coaches. This has just been an area of intense interest for me. And so I thought I would do a whole episode on why it's hard to change. And hopefully in this episode, you may find yourself experiencing a little bit of relief if you're really having a hard time with some type of change that you want to make in your life. Whether it is a behavioral change, whether you want to work out more, whether it's a relational change, you want to be better for your partner, whether it's something that's coming from inside of you, like you know that you want to be a more patient person, or whether it's coming from outside of you, like everyone in your life tells you that you're not a good listener, right? Like regardless of like what the change is, it can be really hard to do so. And there's a lot of focus on the behavioral aspect of change. Like if you want to work out, then go to sleep in your workout gear, or put your tennis shoes right next to your bed. There's all sorts of like behavioral modification things that you can do that will help help create the habit of going to the gym. The thing is, the problem with only focusing on the behavior aspect of change is that it doesn't take into consideration something that psychoanalytic psychotherapy, psychoanalytics theory has really continued to bring into the world, is that the mind is divided against the self. The mind is divided against the self. In that, there are ways in which we want change, and there are ways in which we don't want to change. There are reasons that are conscious and reasons that are unconscious, that are out of our awareness for why we want and don't want to change. But if we don't know this, then if we just focus on the behavior and then we wonder why we're not going to the gym, we may then find ourselves experiencing intense shame and self-loathing, and really beating ourselves up for like, why can't we do something that's so easy like going to the gym? And the truth is, it's because it's not easy. It's not easy for a variety of reasons, and it really depends on the individual, but there may be many reasons why you don't want to go to the gym. For example, you may not want to go to the gym because every time you go to the gym, you're trying to learn something new, and you're feeling really awkward and really uncomfortable, and it doesn't feel like these exercises are easy for you, so it's eliciting a lot of shame to be a beginner, and you're trying all these new things, and you find that people are staring at you, and so why would you want to put yourself in a position where you're constantly experiencing embarrassment and shame? So while you may not be aware that this is a reason, maybe that this is a reason going on for you, and so then you're finding yourself not going to the gym. There's many, many reasons why we both finding ourselves want to set up goals and habits and we want things to be different, and yet we are finding that we're not doing those things. So hopefully I'm going to break down some of the reasons why that may be, and maybe you'll find yourself in this episode, and maybe it will allow you to experience just a little bit more compassion and grace for yourself, because change is hard, and whoever tells you that change is easy is lying to you, okay? They're lying to you because they're trying to sell you something, okay? Like wherever you see anywhere in the world where somebody says, it's easy, you just got to do it this way, they are selling you something, okay? And so you just got to be careful because they need to make it sound easy, because it's not very seductive to be like, hey, listen, change is hard and you may do this and it may not work because you're very ambivalent. But you should try it anyway. right? Like that's not a strong marketing tactic. And so people need to make it sound easy for you to buy it. But it can often be a lie, and then you're left wondering why it's not working for you. It must be because there's something wrong with you. I've been talking about this for a long time. This was true for me when I first started, when I was very intensely interested in spirituality and manifestation. Kind of what in some ways led me to want to do more deeper work was because like I thought I was doing everything right, that all the laws were telling me to do, the law of attraction, the law of reciprocity, all of these kind of spiritual laws. I was doing everything. I was believing in myself. I was meditating, I was doing yoga, I was keeping myself pure, like internally with positive thoughts. I was doing everything and I wasn't getting the results that I wanted. And I decided I needed to approach things differently. And I wanted to then understand, how do we do that? Okay, so why is it so hard to change? I have a bullet list here in front of me. First, why is it so hard to change? Because we don't want to. Because we don't want to change. I mean, right? Like we don't want to change. What we really want, in some ways, what we really want is for us to feel better about the things without having to change a damn thing, right? Like we just want to not be so conflicted, right? We just want to feel better about ourselves without having to change anything. And I think that's where it gets really like seductive, this idea of like self-acceptance. And we're like, I just wish I could accept myself. Like, if I could just accept myself, then I wouldn't really have to grapple with myself. We're not saying this consciously. I think a lot of this is out of our own awareness. But the reason why I think we often don't want to change is because we know that to change means in some ways to give something up. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to change. We really just want people to like us for who we are in a way. And the challenge, of course, is that there is a certain amount of self-acceptance that is embedded in doing any type of psychological work, right? Like, yes, accepting ourselves, loving ourselves, being compassionate to ourselves. This is all an integral part of the work. But there is a way in which sometimes we find ourselves hiding behind self-acceptance as a way to kind of make the argument for why we shouldn't change or we don't really want to change. And this, I think, this often comes up in couples work. I work with couples, and couples often go into couples therapy wanting the other person to change, and kind of secretly, or sometimes not so secretly, hoping that the therapist is going to take their side. And finally, they're going to show up in couples, they're going to sit down, they're going to tell their side, and then the therapist is going to be like, yes, your side is the right side. That person, the other person, your partner, you have to change. Right? And we really want to feel like kind of validated in that. This is so common. This happens all of the time. We hope that if we just tell our story properly, or if we just convince the therapist that we've got it right, then it means that the other person's got it wrong. And any couples therapist worth their grit, right? Like worth their whatever, knows that there's always two sides. Right? There's always two sides. And in some ways, both individuals are contributing to the dynamic that's happening in the relationship. That's just like, it's just the kind of core truth of couples therapy and also kind of any relational work. But we really secretly hope that the other person will change because we don't really want to, right? We see the conflict with our significant other, and we just think, if you could just be the way I want you to be, then we would be happy. Then we would be good. Get with the program. If you could just be blank, we would be fine. It's such a seductive way of thinking. And it's a way that we're trying to hand off responsibility for what's happening in the couple. It just doesn't work. And I think that's also why a lot of couples avoid couples therapy, because they know that if they go to couples therapy, they know on a deeper level that they're going to have to change as well. That if we want the relationship to change, both people are going to have to change. Like, relational dynamics don't work just one way. It takes two, right? So if we want anything different in a relationship, both individuals are going to have to contribute to that. They're going to have to do something. And we may not know what our participation is, and that may be why we need somebody to kind of help us see it. What we may be thinking is our part may not actually be what our part is, right? There's like nuance there. And I'm not certainly kind of like, I'm not victim blaming. I'm not saying that like you're responsible for your partner's behavior. I'm just suggesting that it takes two. and there are ways in which you may be contributing to the dynamic, that's important to look at, because the good news is when we do that is when we're able to own that we have a part in it, well, we can change then a part of the relationship, right? Or a part of ourselves that maybe we'll find that the relationship isn't the best thing for us. But the good news is about change in a couple is that, well, you are not totally helpless. Yes, there are ways in which you can contribute to the change of the relationship, and isn't that good news? Okay. Second bullet point, why is it so hard to change? I think it's so hard to change sometimes because we're thinking about it the wrong way. And I say that having had gone on Instagram and stumbled upon, just another coach, that has 100,000 followers, who was giving an Instagram reel about how if you're tired of caring about what people think of you, the antidote to that, the way you address that, is just by letting go of the kind of sense that people are thinking about you at all. People probably aren't thinking about you. And you just have to internalize the fact that most people aren't thinking about you, and you can't control other people, and people, regardless of if people judge you or not, that's a reflection on them and a reflection on you. And so you just have to let it go, just let it go. And so if a consumer was reading this and seeing this, they may think, I do care a lot about what people think about me. So I just have to let it go. I just have to let it go. But there's no how in that, right? Nothing that I just said. It's kind of like saying, here, I'm going to tell you how to run a marathon. You're going to run a marathon by imagining yourself at the finish line and imagining yourself running across the finish line. And if you could just believe yourself enough to run across the finish line, then you can run the marathon. And it's like anyone who has run a marathon will tell you that that's in no way, shape, or form how you run a marathon. Sure, it may be a part of it may be to imagine that you can do it. A part of it may be imagining yourself crossing the finish line. That may be a part of it. But there's so many mechanics to kind of running a marathon, right? There's so many aspects of it. There is the technical aspect, the skill aspect, the training aspect. You need probably some type of guidance. You need to be able to know how to run a marathon for your own body. Each of us have different body limitations, right? Running a marathon is an actual thing that you have to develop the skills around. You can't just envision yourself being at the end and then just doing it, not unless you want to get injured. But if you didn't know that about running a marathon, you may think, all I have to do is imagine myself at the finish line. And then we get to the race and we start running, and then we realize, oh my gosh, I'm not equipped to do this. I haven't actually done the real training necessary to do this. So in that moment, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, running a marathon is really, really, really hard. And it's it's really, really hard because you haven't trained for it. And not to say that even if you train for it, it's not hard. It is hard. Marathon running is hard. It just is hard. Change just is hard. It is hard. I'm not going to bullshit you. It is hard. But if you have the right team, if you have the right expectations, if you have the right training, if you put effort into it, the hardness comes in a different capacity. It's a different way. And so if you just watch these kind of TikToks, these Instagram reels of people just kind of telling you what the destination is, you just have to accept. You just have to, change your thought about something. Then you're going to think that change is in some ways really easy, and all you have to do is think about it, and then you try to do it, and then it just doesn't get done. And it's because something like grappling with why you have a hard time with people's opinions of you really are different depending on the individual. It depends on what you're imagining the other people thinking of you as. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, I want to work on this, well, then we have to get really curious about what this is for you. What exactly are you worried about? What do you make of this? It may take so much time, months, years, for us to even really fully understand what it is that we're so worried about, let alone start to change it. Oftentimes when we're so worried about people's perspectives or thoughts about us, it's because it's reflecting an internal landscape of paranoia and persecution. It's like there's no goodness inside, right? There's only kind of fear of people's judgments from the outside that really get penetrated, but the good doesn't. So then part of that is expanding our capacity to allow good things in, which is the episode that I've recorded right before this, right? There's so many mechanics to something like how to stop caring so much about what people think of you. And then we have to interrogate what care means. You know, are you allowed to ever take in people's opinions of you? Where does the line lie? You know, what does it mean to care? What does it mean to grapple with the ways in which people have thought about you in a bad way in the past, and how do we grieve that and mourn that? I mean, there's just so much complexity here, and maybe knowing that it's complex allows you then to understand that yes, change is hard, but there's a way and there's a process and there's something that we can kind of do about it, instead of just like pushing you to like think differently without really getting to the mechanics of your mind, which then just serves you to kind of continue to feed into the sense of shame that it's not easy for you to just stop caring what people think about you. This happens all the time. We think it's supposed to be some easy thing, like, oh, you just stop. And then you find yourself not able to just stop and then think that that's a reflection of your goodness and badness. And it's like, no, it's just not the way that this works. So when we're thinking about change as like, oh, you just have to change your thoughts and then you change your life and then you try to change your thoughts, but it's actually very hard to change your thoughts because there's ways in which you're aware of your thoughts, but then there's ways in which you're not aware, right? The mind is divided against the self. This is a core psychoanalytic concept that trickles into every other modality. I mean, it's just a known. It's like a staple in the world of the mind, of psychology. Like the mind is divided against the self, and trying to change our mind without going into any type of exploration or curiosity about the opposite or about the complexity, right, really dishonors the experience. It just doesn't lead to sustainable changes. And if we want sustainable changes, we're going to have to know more about ourselves and where we're divided in our inner conflicts, our ambivalences, etc. Okay. Number 3, why is it so hard to change? Because we're afraid. I mean, this is an obvious one, right? Like we're afraid. We're afraid to change. We're afraid of what change may entail. We're afraid of we're afraid that this is a classic one, right? Like we're afraid of our goodness. We're afraid to succeed. We're afraid that we're actually going to get what we want. For example, if you want to have financial security, you may be afraid to do the changes required to get financial security because you're afraid that is now going to put a lot more pressure on you to maybe support your family, or you're now going to be the evil, quote unquote, rich people that your family have always hated. Or you're afraid that you're going to get all this money and then spend all the money and you're going to go right back. I mean, there's so many things that we're afraid of. And so if we don't change, well, then we don't have to be with the unknown, right? But and this is kind of like connects to the next one, like we don't actually know what change entails. And so we think we know what changes, and then we envision that whatever that changes is going to be out of our control, which is why we have to be the way we are in the first place. So for example, if you really struggle with people pleasing, right? You really struggle with people pleasing. A lot of people pleasing has to do with the fact that we kind of think we know what other people think of us. If we open up to the possibility that we actually don't know what people think about us, well, then that means that we're going to have to open up ourselves to more uncertainty and things feeling more out of control. Now, we are terrified of feeling out of control, which is why we people please, right? We try to imagine the other person's mind because we're terrified that we don't know their mind. So do you see that? So we think that to change means to do something that's absolutely unbearable, which is to let go of control. But that's not what change may actually look like. You know, what change may actually look like in this example is expanding our ability to experience more goodness from other people. And we may not even know what that means or what that looks like or what that feels like. And so we think it's going to be terrible. We think it's going to come at a cost, or we're going to give up something really important about ourselves. I know a lot of people make this joke of like, trauma made me funny. If I heal my trauma, well, then I no longer be funny, right? Like we're so scared to change because we're scared that it's going to take away this thing that we really needed in order to survive. And to that, I say that we just actually don't know. We don't know what change is going to be. But often when it comes to kind of healing or working through our trauma or kind of going into therapy or trying to change ourselves in a significant way, it's really not about changing ourselves beyond our own recognition. It's really about expanding more of who we are. It's not about erasing parts of ourselves, but about being able to be with more aspects of ourselves. That's really what we're looking at. Healing trauma doesn't look like now you're not going to be funny, but it may mean that you can now be with more of yourself and more of the difficult aspects of yourself, right? So if we think about it that way, maybe that can help us grapple with change a little bit more. Maybe that will feel a little bit easier for us to be with change. But we are often really afraid that change will mean giving something up that's been really important. A relationship, we're terrified of change because we're afraid we're going to lose relationships. That maybe we're going to have to really, if we change, we may have to really grapple with the ways in our relationships have not been satisfying. We may have to cut people off, or we may have to, develop different boundaries around people. And we're really afraid of what all of that will mean because we believe it's going to mean a certain thing. Like we believe it means that we're going to be hated. We believe that we're going to be ostracized. We believe all of kind of these worst case scenarios. And so then it's like, so then I don't want to change, right? It's intolerant. I don't want to change. And that's fair. That's fair because doing this work, whatever it looks like, is going to require, things are going to have to change. But often I think we're so focused on the scary aspects of it that we're not in touch with the ways in which change can actually bring more, like more fulfilling relationships, like relationships that see you in a more spacious way, that you'll be more of yourself, that you'll feel more in touch with your brilliance. I mean, right? Like we're always so afraid of like what the bad things are that we forget that like there is some more challenges that will come. Sure, certainly that's true, because it's life, but we may also gain as a result. Okay. Why is it so hard to change? One, this kind of connects to that. It's because we became this way for, in some ways, very important reasons. Like the things that we now want to change are things that we may have had to develop out of an environment, out of relationships, out of an experience that was really important for us psychically. So much of our psychic survival comes out of developing ways of being in the world that we may now really struggle against. So we want to be really compassionate with the fact that a lot of the ways in which we are in the world came out of a necessity. It came out of a need to maintain relationships, right? It came out of a way in which we felt like if we didn't change, if we weren't this way, then we would risk some things that are really, really important to us. So we want to be conscientious of that. We want to be aware that it is hard to change the things that we most needed to be. It's really hard to untangle, for example, from our parental expectations of us. We may now be solidly in our adulthood and still finding ourselves wanting validation and acceptance from our family, from our caregivers, our parents. And it can feel really, really hard to untangle ourselves from that because we really needed to be attuned to their expectations of us in order for us to maintain some type of relationship with them as children. So if we became this way for very important reasons, we want to be really gentle with ourselves as we tackle these things. And oftentimes, this is also kind of a very psychoanalytic way of thinking about things. We don't want to, when we're talking about the facilitator role or the therapist, the healer, coach, teacher, whatever position you're putting yourself in, we want to be careful about our clients, patients' defenses, the way to defend against certain intolerable internal states. We develop defenses. This idea of defenses is psychoanalytic, by the way, and we develop these defenses, as a way of grappling with the environment. And so we can't just now bulldoze through them as the facilitator, therapist, coach, etc., because then it's kind of like ripping apart the foundation of the house without making sure that the house is set on something a little sturdier. Part of another way of thinking about healing is that we're not taking away defenses, but we're creating more flexibility in the defenses. Like let's say there's 20 defenses. I don't know, I'm making that number up. But let's say there's 20 of them and you use like 2 of them, you're going to find your life to be quite rigid and quite stuck. And so the work is not for you to not have any defenses, but to cultivate flexibility in using the other 18 defenses. There's some defenses that are in some ways a sign of greater emotional health than others, but we all utilize all of them at some point in time. It's not a reflection of our goodness or of our badness. There are things that we need to defend ourselves against at any given moment. But the work then is to notice it, is to experience a little bit more flexibility in it, so that we're not kind of so structured and so rigid. But as the kind of facilitator, therapist, coach, we need to be really conscientious of that. People develop for very important reasons, and we don't want to just bulldoze through their defenses. We want to learn about them. We want to understand them. We want to explore. Oh, are you noticing that every time we talk about this happens? Like, I wonder what you make of it, right? Like, we want to get curious about the defenses instead of being like, why are you being so resistant? You know? Hopefully you're not doing that. Okay. I know I mentioned this before, but one of the bullets I wrote here is because we don't actually know what it entails, right? Like, we don't actually know what to change, what it would really mean, what it would really ask of us, what it would really look like. Again, it's all about this uncertainty, and how terrifying uncertainty is. And we, at least, if we don't change, we know what we can expect from ourselves. Change is kind of opens us up to more goodness, but also more badness, because we become more available and more sensitive to things. A lot of times the healing work or doing the work puts us in a place of more sensitivity, not less sensitivity. And if we already find that our sensitivity is intolerable, well, then we're really scared of what that entails. But what it doesn't entail is more overwhelm. But often what it does entail is a greater understanding of our sensitivity and awareness of it, and ways in which then we can tend to them. Because their sensitivity is kind of a source of tremendous amount of information. And so we don't want to desensitize you. See, this is what we think. We often think that change means to either desensitize us, which sometimes we wish that's what we want, and that goes, we're thinking about it the wrong way. We want to just be desensitized. That's not how it works. It's not how change works. The healthy or kind of like psychically supportive change doesn't look like becoming desensitized in a way, emotionally. I'm not talking about like desensitization to like stimulus, like PTSD. I'm not referring to that. So it's not about desensitizing, and it's not about becoming more overwhelmed. And that's the fear, right? That if we're sensitive, and that the healing work is going to make us more sensitive, more overwhelmed, more dysregulated, more kind of all over the place. So if we're afraid of that, then obviously we don't want to change. And we may try to get it the wrong way by trying to become desensitized, and then we find that doesn't work, and then we feel like change isn't right for us. And the actuality is that we're not trying to move into either of the binaries, but what we're trying to do is develop a different relationship with our sensitivity, a different awareness of our sensitivity, so that maybe more flexibility in how we navigate our sensitivity. And sometimes that may mean boundaries, sometimes that may mean a conversation about needs. I'm using kind of classic kind of Instagram language because I know that that's used a lot. It's, that may mean taking some risks. It may mean greater conversation. I mean, who knows what it actually means. But this is where, if we're trying to go at it alone, we can often fail, because we're bringing our paradigm, our way of seeing ourselves into the work, right? So we may not even know ourselves enough in order to do this by ourselves. And that goes back to this idea, right, of the unconscious, which is like a staple psychoanalytic concept that has now become very, very popular. The unconscious is a way of essentially saying that we don't know ourselves fully, and we can never know ourselves fully because there are things about ourselves that are out of our own awareness. An example of this, actually, there's like so many studies that prove that this is true. Like there's, I remember reading a study about like people were asked to select a wine, a German wine or a French wine, and they would play German music or French music, and it turns out like if there was like French music, they picked the French wine, but they wouldn't say that that's the reason why they picked the French wine. That is a great example, right, of a behavioral focused study that proves something that's actually quite hard to prove, which is that there's a lot of things that our brain is taking in that we're not even aware is happening, but then we're making decisions from things that we don't even know we're taking in. This is the unconscious. We may have picked up on a micro expression from somebody and interpreted it to mean that they hate us without it even going into our conscious awareness that they made a micro expression. We may not even have noticed it on some level, but on another level we did, and now we're making decisions around it. This happens all of the time. The unconscious isn't something to be scared of. It's just something to be aware of. The fact that there are ways in which there's awareness. We are both aware of ways in which, and we are not aware of ways in which. And so it's really, really important for us to get curious about ourselves and get curious about our minds and get curious about the places in our minds that we don't often let ourselves go. And it can be really scary to do this alone. And in some ways, it's almost impossible to do this alone if you want to do relational work that you can't, like majority of trauma comes out of relationships, and we can't heal things that get broken in relationships alone. What gets broken in relationships have to be healed in relationships. But anyway, the unconscious is a powerful tool for us to be aware of, because it can help us then know ourselves more deeply and to go and get support so that we can expand what we may know of ourselves, because if it's out of our awareness, it's going to be hard for us to know that of ourselves. Okay. We're in our kind of final two here that I jotted down in 5 minutes. I imagine that there's so many more of these that I could have come up with if I gave it a little bit more time. But the second to final one is, why is it so hard to change? Because we stay too stuck on the concrete. And this goes back to that gym example. If we're setting ourselves up to we're sleeping in our sports bra and we'll put the shoes right between the bed, right next to the bed, and yet we're finding ourselves not going to the gym, we may find that change is really hard. We'll find that the habit of going to the gym can be really hard to create because we're staying too much in the behavior. We're staying too much in the concreteness of the gym. This goes back to what I just said, but there may be so many other reasons for why we're not going to the gym. If we expand beyond the concrete, if we go and move into more of the symbolic ways in which we may be making meaning of our lives, making meaning of events, making meaning of the gym, making meaning of our body, making meaning of our feelings, our internal states, we may then find ourselves going to the gym without even forcing ourselves to do so. It is unreal how often I've seen people make changes without even knowing that they're making changes because they've addressed some of the underlying root conflict. It happens all of the time. And in some ways, this is like the best type of change because we're not like forcing ourselves. We're not willpowering ourselves to the change, which sometimes is essential and the only way the change can happen. I'm not devaluing willpower, but I am saying that there's something really cool about the changes that kind of just happen. Like we just find ourselves doing something differently. We just find ourselves navigating a conflict differently because we worked through the conflict internally or with our therapist, coach, facilitator, etc. We're working it through with somebody. So then when we find ourselves now in a similar situation, we're navigating it differently. I see this in my group all the time. I run an in-person group for women on Tuesday nights. And it's so cool watching them grapple with really difficult aspects of relating in a really safe environment. And without even knowing it, they just expand our capacity to be with some of the things that then allow them to do it differently in their lives, again, without even consciously being aware of it, without even forcing themselves to do it. So when we stay too stuck on the concrete, when we stay too stuck on why am I not doing it differently? I set everything up so that I could do it differently. I need to find better systems to do it differently. This often comes up with food. I work with women who navigate eating disorders. Well, I work with all people around eating disorders, but I often see that eating disorders is such a beautiful example of us staying so in the concrete, right? It's about food, it's about body, it's about how we feel physically, right? It's how we look. But food and eating disorders tend to not actually be about food at all, but our relationship to food, our relationship with ourselves, which is often then not even about like our relationship to food, like my relationship to Cheez-Its, but more about my relationship to how other people have related to me, how I have related to myself, et cetera, et cetera. So much of eating disorders is not about food. And if we say too concrete, not that there's not a role or a place for the concrete, I'm not saying that, but I'm just suggesting if we think that change is only about the concrete, we miss so many opportunities to develop deeper insights, to develop different ways of relating to ourselves, to getting more curious about ourselves. Oftentimes, the answer isn't concrete. That oftentimes, and this actually, as I'm talking about it, also comes up a lot in my couples work. Because we often think that if we want to navigate a conflict, if we want a conflict to get resolved in a relationship, it's concrete. I don't like that you don't take out the trash. The answer is for you to take out the trash. And we're gonna set up systems to remind you to take out the trash. Now, something may be alleviated in that system. However, oftentimes, we're not actually talking about the trash. We're talking about the division of labor. We're talking about emotional needs. We're talking about feeling unpartnered. We're talking about feeling like the other person doesn't have the same priorities as us. We're talking about value systems. We're talking about other things. And what's so wild that happens a lot in couples is that just having space to work through our feelings about the other person changes something in the relationship, even if the other person then doesn't do anything differently. Sometimes conflicts in relationships are so deeply embedded in our history that it's really not about problem solving, but more about expanding what the relationship can hold, being in some of these things together, being in the symbolic with the other person. It is absolutely wild how many conflicts get resolved that have nothing to do with problem solving the concrete and have everything to do with being heard, being seen, and being in it with somebody else. And this takes me to the very final bullet. Why is it so hard to change? Because it's hard. Because it is hard. Change is hard. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Remember, what did we start off saying? That if somebody is selling you change is easy if somebody's telling you that change is easy, they are selling you something, okay? Let's keep that in mind. And it's hard, and it requires us to tolerate what has been at one point intolerable. And this is why it can be really hard to do alone. When we have not been able to tolerate certain internal states like uncertainty, feelings out of control, feeling helpless, it's going to be really hard to develop this by ourselves. We often need partnership with a professional who can help us. However, there are all sorts of ways that we can expand our capacity to tolerate the intolerable. The ways are out in the world. And so I want to focus less on the way and focus more on this idea that part of a really important part of change is an invitation for us to tolerate more of our internal landscape. It's kind of like if you think about a castle, right? And you kind of, as you grew up, you were taught that certain rooms had to stay closed. You weren't allowed to say that. You weren't allowed to feel that. You weren't allowed to say it that way. You could only do it this way. If you wanted to not make your mom angry, you had to do it this way. Like if you were kind of taught to close doors and only stay in certain rooms, certain places in the castle, well, part of change, part of expanding our kind of personality and getting less stuck, finding ourselves in deeply entrenched patterns, part of untangling ourselves from all that is going to be to open up some of these doors and go into some of the rooms that have been essentially cut off. And it's going to feel in some ways really scary. It's going to be really hard, and it's often going to feel intolerable. But if we do it in an environment that feels containing, if we do it slowly, then there's some real opportunities there for us to then have more castle to live in. Like I said, more is better. More castle is better. Experiencing more of yourself is better. Always. That's always the case. But it can feel really scary to do so. And I really, really do get that. So much of change. I have another one. As I'm saying, so much of change requires us to slow things down. And this is also why it's so hard to change, because we live in a world that has some very clear values. And some of those values include speed. So there's a lot of marketing out there that they can heal your trauma in 6 weeks. And why would I want to heal my trauma in 6 years if it can take 6 weeks? Like, that's pretty seductive marketing, right? Speed means that it's effective. Even the word effective, efficient, these are all values of our culture. Especially if we're investing money, we want things to happen quickly. And in some ways, we want quickness as a way to not change. If we want things to happen quickly, it's almost like it's because we don't really want to invest in it. We don't really want to change. And so then if it doesn't happen quickly, then we can say, see, it's because it wasn't meant for me, rather than the fact that change actually does. The more sustainable changes you want, the longer it's going to take. The more deeply ingrained pattern you're talking about, the longer it's going to take. The deeply more part of your personality it is, the longer it's going to take. These things take time. There's a massive difference between changing your gym habit and changing your relationship to food. Two very different types of changes. There's a difference between wanting to, I can't even think, learning how to cook better, right? Versus learning how to be more patient. Those are two different levels of change. One of them is going to take a lot longer, and it's not the cooking one. And so our culture values things that are counter to what it takes to create the sustainable changes that we want. Speed is not the answer. Efficiency, effectiveness, kind of that sense of needing things to happen quickly is often not the way. It doesn't mean that it has to take forever. In many ways, I've often said that time doesn't exist in healing, because it both takes longer than you probably think and faster than you probably think. Those both things can be true. But yeah, it just goes back to this idea that, and again, this is why I really love psychoanalytics kind of theory, because it is very counterculture to a lot of different other therapy modalities, but also ways of being in the world, and the ways in which things have to be happening fast, and you have to think certain ways. There's cognitive distortions, there's ways in which you're thinking wrongly, and if you think rightly, then you'll get what you want. And psychoanalytics, doesn't really uphold that or believe that. In fact, it believes that things are allowed to take time, and time can really nourish us. And so change is hard because it takes time, and we don't want it to take time. But then we're doing a disservice to ourselves by trying to speed something that we can't speed through. Yes? So change takes time. It takes investment. It takes energy. It takes commitment. All of these things are true. It all can be really frustrating. But let's go back to why do we want to change in the first place? Because life in many ways gets to be better when we grow, and not all of us value growth. Not all of us want to grow, and that's totally fine. I'm not here to push my value system on you, but I'm imagining you're listening to this podcast because you do value growth, and growth is a beautiful, wonderful thing, and we're growing all the time in all sorts of ways, and oftentimes we don't recognize our own growth until we look back and really make a diligent effort to do so. But I recommend doing that, quite often, because there's something really cool about watching ourselves grow. But growth doesn't just happen to us, it requires us to really show up for it. I think about how I want to be when I'm older, and what makes some old people old versus an elder. And it's not time. Time isn't what gives you wisdom. It's work, it's insight, it's showing up for yourself and showing up for each other. And wisdom is earned. It's not just a passive experience of time. If we want to be kind of like the wise elders, if we want to kind of look back in our lives and feel like we really took it in, if we were really present and we were really committed, that takes work. That doesn't just happen. That's just not how it works. Yeah. So I'm celebrating the fuck out of you. If you're here, if you're trying to change and trying to grow and you're doing it and you find yourself backsliding, it's because it's hard. It's because it's hard. It takes time, and it takes us repeating some things over and over and over again. You know, growth is like a spiral. We got to revisit the same things sometimes, many, many times. There's many ways in which growth feels exactly the opposite of how we thought it was going to feel, right? Like we think that like it was going to feel this way, but it doesn't feel that way. It can often feel sticky and crunchy and not good, and we think that we're doing it wrong. There's so much trusting that has to take place. There's so much surrendering. This is all really hard work, and I'm celebrating you for being in it. Thank you for your patience in this recent podcast hiatus. I'm so endlessly appreciative of each and every one of you who tune in to my podcast. I don't take it lightly. Thank you so, so much. I'm hopefully going to continue to find ways to release new episodes on a regular basis because I have some really good ideas and things that I want to share with all of you. Let's wrap it up here, and I will see you all next time.